The transport pod hummed as it descended through Valara's crimson atmosphere. Commander James Reeves pressed his palm against the viewport, watching the alien city materialize below, spires of crystalline structures that seemed to breathe with bioluminescent light. "Welcome to diplomatic hell," his predecessor had said before departing. "They tolerate us. Nothing more." James was humanity's newest ambassador to the Valari, a species that had reluctantly agreed to trade negotiations after decades of Cold War. The posting was considered career suicide. No diplomat had lasted more than 6 months before requesting transfer. The pod docked at the embassy compound, a sterile human habitat surrounded by the living, breathing architecture of Valara. James gathered his belongings, straightening his uniform before the airlock opened. She was waiting on the other side. James had studied Valari physiology extensively, but nothing prepared him for seeing one in person. She stood nearly 6 feet tall, her form elegantly humanoid yet unmistakably alien. Her skin seemed to shift between deep violet and midnight blue, adorned with intricate patterns that pulsed faintly with her heartbeat. Her eyes, large, luminous, and the color of molten gold, fixed on him with unsettling intensity. Hair like liquid silver cascaded down her back, moving as if underwater. "Commander Reeves." Her voice carried a melodic quality that made his name sound like music. "I am Kyra, assigned as your cultural liaison." James extended his hand, remembering too late that Valari didn't shake hands. Kyra studied his outstretched palm for a long moment before slowly placing her hand in his. Her skin was warm, almost feverishly so, and covered in a texture like the finest velvet. The touch lasted only seconds, but James felt something electric pass between them. "Thank you for meeting me," he managed, withdrawing his hand slowly. Kyra's expression was unreadable, those golden eyes searching his face. "Your predecessors rarely left their quarters. They found our presence disturbing." "I'm not my predecessors." "We shall see." She turned, gesturing for him to follow. "The council will meet you at sunset. Until then, I will show you the city." As they walked through streets that seemed grown rather than built, James noticed how other Valari reacted to them, or rather, to Kyra. Some averted their eyes. Others made gestures he didn't understand but sensed were hostile. "Are you in trouble for being assigned to me?" he asked quietly. Kyra didn't look at him. "Among my people, I am considered tainted. I spent years studying human culture, learning your languages, understanding your ways. Many believe this has made me less Valari." Her patterns dimmed slightly. "They think I've become too much like an animal." The venom in that last word made James stop walking. "An animal. That is what some call humans here. Primitive. Emotional. Lacking the refinement of true sentient beings." She finally met his eyes. "Do you find that offensive, Commander?" "Yes," he said honestly. "We may be different, but we're not animals." Something flickered across Kyra's face, surprise, perhaps, or the beginning of respect. "Your honesty is noted. Come, we will be late." As they continued walking, James couldn't shake the feeling that this assignment would change everything he thought he knew about connection, about understanding, about what it meant to bridge two worlds. He had no idea how right he was. 3 weeks on Valara had taught James that diplomatic progress moved at a glacial pace. The council meetings were exercises in ritualized contempt, the Valari elders barely acknowledging his presence while negotiating through Kyra as if he weren't in the room. But his evenings with Kyra had become something else entirely. She arrived at his quarters after sunset, as had become their routine. Tonight, she carried a container of Valari nutritional compounds she'd been trying to help him adapt to. James had reciprocated by attempting to cook human meals with varying degrees of success. "You're improving," Kyra said, sampling the pasta he'd managed to prepare from Earth rations. "It no longer tastes like processed synthetics." "High praise," James laughed, sitting across from her at the small table. "Should I put that in my report?" "Mission accomplished. Alien finds my cooking barely edible." Kyra's patterns brightened. He'd learned this was similar to a smile. "Your humor is strange, but not unpleasant." They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the past weeks. After failed council sessions, they would retreat to his quarters and talk for hours, about their worlds, their cultures, their dreams. Kyra would describe the singing forests of her homeworld's southern continent. James would tell her about Earth's oceans, which fascinated her endlessly. Tonight, she seemed more withdrawn, her patterns dim and sluggish. "What happened today?" James asked gently. "And don't tell me nothing. You've been quiet since we left the council chamber." Kyra set down her utensil carefully. "Elder Vextal suggested they replace me. He said I had become too sympathetic to human interests, that I could no longer be trusted to maintain proper perspective." "That's ridiculous. You've been nothing but professional." "Professional." Kyra repeated the word as if tasting it. "Is that what you think I am, James? Professional?" The use of his first name, something she'd never done before, made his heart skip. "I think you're brilliant, compassionate, and the only reason I haven't gone completely insane dealing with that council." She stood abruptly, pacing to the window overlooking the city. Her reflection in the glass was ethereal, almost ghost-like. "Do you know what Vextal called me today? A pet. He said I had become humanity's pet, that I fawned over you like a domesticated creature." James rose, moving to stand beside her. "Kyra, do you see me that way?" She turned to face him, those golden eyes searching his. "When you look at me, do you see something wild that needs taming? Something exotic and foreign? Am I just an animal to you, dressed up in diplomatic clothing?" The raw vulnerability in her voice cracked something open in James's chest. He'd been so careful, so professional, maintaining the distance required of his position. But standing this close to her, seeing the pain in her eyes, he couldn't maintain the lie anymore. "No," he said softly, reaching up to gently touch her cheek. The warmth of her skin against his palm sent electricity through his body. "I see someone extraordinary. Someone who makes me look forward to every day, who challenges me, who makes me want to be better. I see someone I think about constantly, even when I know I shouldn't." Kyra's breath caught, her patterns suddenly blazing with light. "James, you're not an animal," he continued, his thumb tracing the delicate patterns on her cheekbone. "You're everything." For a long moment, they stood frozen, the weight of unspoken feelings hanging between them. Then Kyra closed the distance, pressing her forehead against his in what he'd learned was a Valari gesture of deep intimacy. "This is forbidden," she whispered. "If the council knew." "I know. It could destroy both our careers." "I know. You could be sent home in disgrace." "Kyra," James said, pulling back just enough to meet her eyes. "I don't care." Her hands came up to rest on his chest, feeling his heartbeat beneath her palms. "Your species bonds so easily. How do I know this is real?" "Test me," he challenged softly. "Ask me anything." "Do you fear me? What I am?" "No. Do you see me as less than human?" "I see you as more," he said honestly. "More brave, more graceful, more remarkable than anyone I've ever met." Kyra's golden eyes shimmered with something that might have been tears, if Valari could cry. "In my culture, when two souls recognize each other, we perform the bonding of light. It is intimate, sacred." "Show me," James breathed. She guided his hands to her temples, placing her own against his. Her patterns began to glow brighter, and suddenly James felt it, a connection deeper than touch, more profound than words. Her emotions flooded through him, loneliness, hope, fear, and beneath it all, something that burned with an intensity that took his breath away. Love. She loved him. And in that moment of connection, she felt the same from him. The weeks of longing, the desperate hope, the way his world had reorganized itself around her. When they finally broke apart, both were trembling. "This changes everything," Kyra whispered. James pulled her into his arms, feeling how perfectly she fit against him despite their differences. "Then let it change." They stood together in the dim light, two souls from different worlds who had found something neither expected, a bridge that could span any distance, any difference. Outside, Valara's 3 moons rose over the city, bathing them in silver light. The scandal broke 3 days later. James was reviewing trade proposals when Kyra burst into his quarters, her patterns flickering wildly with distress. "They know," Someone saw us, reported us to the council. His stomach dropped. What will they do? To me. Exile, likely. Removal from my caste. Her voice cracked. To you, they will demand your removal from Valara. Our entire diplomatic relationship could collapse. James stood, taking her hands in his. Then we face it together. You don't understand what you're saying. Among my people, what we've shared, she paused, her golden eyes searching his face. The bonding of light is not casual. It is a promise of souls. In your terms, it would be considered a marriage bond. The weight of her words settled over him. I know. You know. Her patterns flared bright with shock. James, this means. I know exactly what it means. He pulled her closer, cupping her face in his hands. And I don't regret a single moment. The emergency council session was called for sunset. James stood before the 7 Valari elders, their tall forms radiating disapproval. Kyra stood at his side, her head held high despite the whispers from the gathered crowd. Elder Vextal spoke first, his voice dripping with contempt. Commander Reeves, you stand accused of corrupting one of our people, of using your position to manipulate a sacred Valari ritual. How do you answer? I deny the corruption, James said firmly. I deny the manipulation. What happened between Kyra and me was mutual, consensual, and genuine. You speak of a Valari soul bond as if it were one of your casual human entanglements, another elder hissed. You have no concept of what you've done. Then explain it to me, James challenged. Because from where I'm standing, 2 adults made a choice to connect, to care for each other. If that's a crime, then your justice is flawed. The chamber erupted in angry voices. Kyra's patterns dimmed with fear. Silence. Vextal commanded. He turned his gaze to Kyra. You. What do you say in your defense? Kyra straightened, her voice carrying across the chamber. I say that I have found something I never expected. James is not a lesser being, not an animal, not a curiosity. He is my equal. My chosen one. Impossible, Vextal spat. A human cannot be equal to. Do you see me as an animal too? Kyra interrupted, her voice breaking. Because that is what you've called me. Ever since I began studying human culture, ever since I dared to see value in their ways, you have treated me as contaminated. As less than Valari. The chamber fell silent. James felt his heart breaking for her, for the years of prejudice she'd endured. Vextal's patterns flickered with what might have been shame. You twist my words. Do I? Kyra turned to address the full council. Tell me, elders, when was the last time you truly looked at humans as sentient beings worthy of respect? When did you last consider that perhaps they have something to teach us? They are primitive, another elder argued weakly. They are different, Kyra corrected. And I have learned more from James about honor, compassion, and courage than I learned in years serving this council. James watched her defend not just their bond, but everything he represented. He'd never been more in love with anyone in his life. Enough, Vextal said finally. Kyra, you will be stripped of your position. Commander Reeves, you will be. Wait. Elder Harven, the oldest and quietest of the council, rose from her seat. Her patterns were calm, contemplative. Before we pass judgment, I wish to invoke the trial of understanding. The chamber gasped. Even Vextal looked shocked. That ritual hasn't been performed in centuries. Then perhaps it is time, Harven said softly. If these 2 truly share a soul bond, they will survive the trial. If they do not, nature will decide their fate. James looked to Kyra. What is she talking about? Kyra's eyes were wide with fear and hope. The trial of understanding takes a bonded pair into the wilderness of mirrors, a region of Valara where the environment responds to emotional truth. If a bond is false, the wilderness reveals it. If it is true, we prove it to everyone, James finished. He turned to the council. We accept. James, no, Kyra whispered urgently. The trial is dangerous. Pairs have died there. He took her hand, intertwining their fingers. Then we'll face it together. Unless you don't think we can. Her patterns blazed bright. I know we can. Raven nodded slowly. It is decided. At dawn, you will enter the wilderness of mirrors. May the truth guide you. As they left the council chamber, James pulled Kyra aside into an empty corridor. Tell me everything about this trial. The wilderness responds to our deepest truths and fears. It will show us reflections of ourselves, of each other. If we falter, if doubt creeps in, if our bond is not genuine. She trailed off. It won't falter, James said with certainty. Kyra, I need you to understand something. In my culture, we have a ritual too. A promise made before others. He took both her hands in his. When someone finds the person they want to spend their life with, they ask a question. Her patterns quickened. What question? Will you marry me? The words came out raw, honest, terrifying. I know it's fast, I know it's complicated, but I also know that every cell in my body recognizes you. Will you be my wife? My partner? My everything? Kyra's eyes widened, her patterns exploding into cascades of light. James, you can't mean. I've never meant anything more in my life. For a moment, she simply stared at him. Then she pulled him into a fierce embrace, her face buried in his neck. Yes, she whispered against his skin. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They held each other in that corridor as Valara's sun set, two souls from different worlds promising each other forever. Tomorrow, they would face the wilderness of mirrors. Tonight, they had each other. Dawn broke cold and crimson over the wilderness of mirrors. James and Kyra stood at the edge of the crystalline forest, a vast expanse where reality and perception blurred into something unknowable. The trees weren't really trees, they were formations of living crystal that reflected and distorted everything they touched. Elder Raven stood with them, her ancient patterns dim in the early light. Once you enter, you cannot leave until the wilderness releases you. It will test your bond in ways you cannot anticipate. Trust in each other. Trust in your truth. James squeezed Kyra's hand. Ready. Her golden eyes met his. With you? Always. They stepped forward together. The moment they crossed the threshold, the world shifted. The crystal formations around them began to pulse and shimmer, and suddenly James saw himself reflected in 1,000 facets, but each reflection showed a different version of him. In one, he looked aged and bitter. In another, afraid and alone. In a third, he was walking away from Kyra while she reached for him, her patterns dimmed with sorrow. Don't look at them, Kyra said, her hand tightening on his. They're showing us possible futures. Fears given form. But James couldn't look away from one particular reflection. It showed him back on Earth, surrounded by other humans, laughing and celebrating. And Kyra was nowhere to be seen. Is that what you want? The voice came from the crystals themselves, resonant and hollow. Safety among your own kind? A life uncomplicated by alien attachments? No, James said firmly, tearing his gaze away. That's not my future. The crystals shifted, and now Kyra was reflected. In her myriad images, James saw her standing among other Valari, elevated and honored, her patterns bright with belonging. But in all these visions, she was alone. You could be revered, the wilderness whispered to her. Return to your people without this human anchor. Reclaim your place. You need not diminish yourself for a being so beneath you. Kyra's patterns flickered with doubt, and James felt his heart constrict with fear. Was this how it would end? Would she realize she deserved better, someone of her own kind who could give her the life she was meant for? Kyra, he said softly. She turned to him, and he saw tears in her golden eyes, the first time he'd seen a Valari cry. They're wrong, she said fiercely. You don't diminish me. You elevate me. You make me want to be more than I ever imagined. The wilderness shuddered, and suddenly they were separated. James stumbled forward, finding himself in a chamber of mirrors that showed only one image. Kyra, but twisted, monstrous, her features distorted into something terrifying. "This is what she truly is," the wilderness hissed. "Alien. Other. Unknowable. Can you really love something so different from yourself?" James's breath came in ragged gasps as the distorted images surrounded him. Fear clawed at his chest, primal, instinctive fear of the unknown. But then he remembered, the warmth of her touch, the sound of her laughter, the way her patterns brightened when she was happy. He remembered the bonding of light, the moment their souls had touched and he'd felt her essence. Beautiful, compassionate, brave. "Yes," he said aloud. "She's not what I expected. She's so much more." The mirrors shattered. Kyra found herself in a different chamber, surrounded by reflections of James, each one speaking in his voice. "You're convenient," one said coldly. "An exotic experience." "I'll leave you," another promised. "When things get difficult, when the novelty wears off, I'll return to my own kind." "You're deluding yourself," a third whispered. "Humans can't sustain deep bonds. We're too flighty, too emotional, too primitive." Kyra felt her patterns dimming with despair. What if they were right? What if she was investing her heart in someone who would inevitably disappoint her? Then she heard his real voice, distant but clear. "Kyra, where are you?" The fear in his voice was genuine. The desperation. He was searching for her through the wilderness, refusing to give up. And she remembered, the way he'd stood before the council, defending her. The way he'd looked at her when he proposed. The certainty in his eyes when he'd said they would face the trial together. "He won't leave me," she said to the false reflections. "Because I know his truth. I've touched his soul." The chamber dissolved. They found each other in the center of the wilderness, running into each other's arms. Kyra's patterns blazed like a star, and James held her as if he'd never let go. "I saw such terrible things," she whispered. "Me too," James admitted. "But none of it was real. This is real. You and me." The wilderness seemed to take a breath, and then the crystal formations began to sing, a sound like wind chimes and starlight, beautiful and alien. The ground beneath them started to glow with the same patterns that decorated Kyra's skin. "The wilderness accepts our bond," Kyra breathed in awe. "James, we did it." But the trial wasn't over. The crystals coalesced into one final challenge, a massive mirror that showed them together, but decades older. In the reflection, James was clearly aged, his hair grey, his face lined. Kyra looked almost unchanged. Valari lived 3 times as long as humans. "You will lose him," the wilderness said, no longer threatening but simply stating truth. "Long before your life ends, his will be over. This is the price of your bond." Kyra's breath caught, and James felt her trembling in his arms. It was the one truth they hadn't discussed, the reality neither had wanted to acknowledge. "I know," Kyra said, her voice breaking. "I will have to watch him grow old while I remain. I will have to say goodbye while my life stretches on without him." She looked up at James, tears streaming down her face. "And I choose this anyway. However many years we have, they will be enough. They will have to be." James pulled her closer, his own eyes burning. "Then we make every day count. Every moment. We don't waste a single second." The mirror showed one final image, the two of them, old and young respectively, still holding hands, still looking at each other with the same love they felt right now. And in that image, there was no sadness, only gratitude for the time they'd had. The wilderness released them. They emerged from the crystal forest to find the council waiting. Even Vextal looked shaken by their survival. "The wilderness of mirrors has spoken," Elder Harven said, her patterns bright with satisfaction. "Your bond is true and tested. No one may question it now." Kyra turned to face the council, still holding James's hand. "Then hear my truth. James asked me to be his wife, using his people's customs. And I said yes. I choose him, knowing all the challenges, all the differences, all the pain that may come. I choose him anyway." James stepped forward. "And I choose her. I will spend every day of my life proving that love isn't limited by species or custom. That understanding can bridge any divide." Vextal was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, his patterns shifted to a shade that indicated respect. Perhaps we have been too rigid in our thinking. Perhaps there are lessons we can learn from humanity after all. It wasn't acceptance, not entirely, but it was a beginning. As they walked back to the city together, Kyra leaned her head against James's shoulder. We still have so much to face. My people, your people, the questions and the challenges. I know, James said, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. But we'll face it all together. That's what marriage means, right? Partners, no matter what comes. Kyra's patterns glowed softly. In Valari culture, we have a saying, 2 souls, 1 light. I never understood it until now. Then let's be that light, James said. Let's show both our peoples what's possible when we choose love over fear. As Valara's sun set, painting the sky in impossible colors, they stood together on the edge of a new beginning. 2 souls from different worlds, united by something that transcended all boundaries. Love had built a bridge between the stars. And they would walk it together, hand in hand, for as long as fate allowed. 6 months after the trial of mirrors, James and Kyra stood before both their peoples in an unprecedented ceremony. The venue was neither fully human nor entirely Valari, a testament to what they'd been building together. The human delegation had arrived from Earth, including James's sister Maya, who traveled 3 months by ship to attend. She stood now, tears streaming down her face, as her brother prepared to marry someone from another world. The Valari Council was present too, even Vextal, whose patterns had slowly softened toward the human ambassador and his chosen mate. The elder had become, if not an ally, at least less of an adversary. This is insane, Maya whispered to James before the ceremony. You're really doing this? James smiled, watching Kyra across the ceremonial space as she prepared with Elder Harven. Every day with her feels like coming home. Like I found the piece of myself I didn't know was missing. But she's, Maya paused, searching for the right word. Perfect, James finished. Different. Yes. Alien. Technically. But perfect for me. The ceremony blended both traditions. Kyra wore traditional Valari bonding crystals woven through her silver hair, while James wore a human suit modified to incorporate Valari design elements. When they came together at the center of the space, both communities fell silent. Elder Harven spoke first in Valari, her patterns glowing with ancient authority. Then Maya translated the human vows. The words spoke of unity, of bridges between worlds, of love that transcended all boundaries. Do you, James Reeves, take Kyra as your bonded one? Harven asked. Knowing that her life will outlast yours by decades? Knowing that she will carry your memory long after you are gone? I do, James said firmly. And I promise to make every day so full of love that those memories will sustain her for a lifetime. Kyra's patterns blazed brilliant gold. Harven turned to her. Do you, Kyra, take James Reeves as your bonded one? Knowing that you will watch him age while you remain? Knowing that you will face the pain of loss? I do, Kyra said, her voice unwavering. And I promise to cherish every moment, to never take our time for granted, to love him with everything I am. They performed the bonding of light again, this time before their people. James felt Kyra's presence in his mind, her love washing over him in waves. Through their connection, he felt her joy, her hope, her absolute certainty that this was right. When they broke apart, both were glowing, Kyra with her patterns, James with simple human happiness. That night, they celebrated in their new shared quarters, designed to accommodate both species' needs. The space was filled with guests from 2 worlds, all trying to understand and appreciate each other's customs. Later, when the last guests had departed, James and Kyra stood on their balcony overlooking the city. Valara's 3 moons hung heavy in the sky, casting silver light over everything. Are you happy? James asked, pulling Kyra against his chest. She turned in his arms, her golden eyes luminous in the moonlight. I never knew I could feel this way. Like every cell in my body is singing. Is that a Valari thing or just a you thing? He teased. It's a you thing, she said, rising on her toes to kiss him. Her lips were soft and warm, tasting faintly of the celebratory wines they'd shared. "Everything good in my life now is a you thing." James deepened the kiss, his hands tracing the patterns on her back that he'd come to know so well. Kyra made a sound low in her throat, her own hand sliding under his shirt to feel his skin. "We should go inside," she murmured against his mouth. "Probably," James agreed, but neither moved. When they finally made their way to the bedroom, their lovemaking was tender and passionate, a physical expression of the bond they'd forged. James marveled at how perfectly they fit together despite their differences, how Kyra's warmth seeped into him, how her patterns glowed brighter with pleasure, how she whispered his name in Valari like a prayer. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Kyra's head on James's chest, listening to his heartbeat. "Tell me about Earth's oceans again," she requested softly. James smiled, running his fingers through her silver hair. "Vast and deep, blue-green and mysterious. Waves that crash against the shore with such force they shake the ground. And underneath, whole worlds we're still discovering." "I want to see them," Kyra said. "I want to dive beneath the surface with you, explore those mysterious depths." "We will," James promised. "Earth next year for our first anniversary. I want to show you everything, the oceans, the mountains, the forests. I want you to meet my family properly, not just through holographic transmissions. And I want to take you to the singing forests of southern Valara," Kyra said, "where the trees make music with the wind, where my ancestors first learned to read the patterns of the universe." They talked late into the night, making plans for the future, both immediate and distant. They discussed children, though that would require significant medical intervention given their biological differences. They talked about their work, James's diplomatic missions and Kyra's research into cross-species understanding. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked as sleep began to claim him. "Choosing me over a life that would have been easier?" Kyra propped herself up on one elbow, looking down at him with those incredible golden eyes. "Never. Not once. You are my unexpected miracle, James Reeves. You are the bridge I didn't know I needed." "We're both the bridge," James corrected, pulling her back down against him. "Together, we're showing both our peoples what's possible." As they drifted off to sleep, wrapped in each other's arms, neither saw the small group gathered in the courtyard below. A mix of humans and Valari, young people who'd been inspired by James and Kyra's story, who were beginning to build friendships across the species divide. Change was slow. There were still those on both sides who opposed the union, who saw it as dangerous or unnatural. But every day, more people looked at James and Kyra and saw not differences, but possibility. 3 years later, Kyra gave birth to their daughter, a genetic miracle achieved through advanced medical intervention. The child had her mother's golden eyes and her father's smile, her skin bearing faint patterns that glowed softly in dim light. They named her Nova, meaning new star in human languages and carrying similar meaning in Valari. James held his daughter in the hospital, Kyra exhausted but radiant beside him, and felt his heart expand to encompass this new love. Nova grasped his finger with surprising strength, her golden eyes blinking up at him with infant curiosity. "She's perfect," he whispered. "She's our bridge," Kyra said softly. "The living proof that love conquers all boundaries." Over the years, they faced challenges, cultural misunderstandings, political pressures, the simple difficulty of blending two very different lives. There were moments of doubt, times when the weight of being pioneers felt overwhelming. But they always came back to that moment in the wilderness of mirrors, when they'd chosen each other despite knowing all the challenges ahead. They'd chosen love over fear, possibility over safety, hope over doubt. And gradually, others followed their example. More humans and Valari began forming connections. The diplomatic ice began to thaw. Trade flourished. Scientific collaboration produced breakthroughs neither species could have achieved alone. 20 years after James first arrived on Valara, he stood again before the council. His hair was graying now, lines deepening around his eyes, signs of human aging that Kyra still bore none of. But his eyes were bright as he presented the treaty that would formally unite their two peoples in alliance. "This treaty represents everything my wife and I have worked toward," he said. "Not a merger of cultures, but a celebration of both. Not the erasure of differences, but the appreciation of them." Kyra stood beside him, her hand in his as always. Nova, now 17 and stunning with her blend of human and Valari features, watched from the audience with her own young Valari friend. The council approved the treaty unanimously. That night, James and Kyra lay in their bed, the same one they'd shared for 2 decades. Kyra traced the lines on James's face with gentle fingers. "You're getting old," she said, but there was no sadness in her voice, only tenderness. "I am," James agreed. "And you're as beautiful as the day we met." "These coming years will be hard," Kyra admitted. "Watching you age while I don't." "But we knew that going in," James reminded her. "We knew, and we chose it anyway. We chose love." "No regrets?" Kyra asked. James pulled her close, breathing in her familiar scent. "Not a single one. Every day with you has been a gift. Even when it was hard, even when we struggled, every day was worth it." Kyra's patterns glowed softly in the darkness. "Do you remember what I asked you, at the very beginning? If you saw me as an animal?" "I remember." "And you said no. You said you saw me as my wife," James finished. "The best decision I ever made." They held each other in the quiet darkness, 2 souls from different worlds who had built something beautiful together. Their love had created ripples that spread across both civilizations, opening minds and hearts, proving that the greatest barriers could be overcome with courage and compassion. Outside their window, Valara's 3 moons shone bright, casting silver light over a city where humans and Valari now walk together, not as separate species, but as partners in building a shared future. And somewhere in that city, young people of both races looked up at those moons and dreamed of their own bridges to build, their own connections to forge. Because James and Kyra had shown them the way. 2 souls, 1 light, burning bright enough to illuminate both their worlds. The end.